Hello, welcome back to fineLEARN. I am Kostuvi. This is part 2 of lecture 12 and we have been discussing about the age of the Mauryas, right? In part 1 of this lecture, we have already seen how the Maurya dynasty was established and we also learned about King Chandragupta Maurya and his successor King Bindusara, right? Now after Bindusara comes Ashoka. Right, and in this lecture we will be talking about King Ashoka and his policies in detail, right? But before talking about Ashoka, we'll just try to recollect a few important points from part 1 of this lecture, right? So first, we already know that Chandragupta Maurya, with the help of Kautilya or Chanakya, he established the Maurya dynasty after overthrowing the Nanda dynasty. Right. Now we also learned about the administrative system of the Mauryan Empire, right? And the sources of studying the administration are Kautilya's Arthashastra and Megasthenes' account, that is Indica, right? Megasthenes was a Greek ambassador who came to the court of Chandragupta Maurya. We already have seen that, right? Now Chandragupta, he was succeeded by his son Bindusara. Right, and Bindusara was also successful in keeping the vast empire intact, alright, and he also maintained diplomatic relations with the Greek rulers, right. Now after Bindusara comes Ashoka, and Ashoka, as we know, is the greatest of all the Maurya rulers, right? And if traditions have to be believed, as per Buddhist traditions, Ashoka, it is said that he had to engage in a war or a struggle with his brothers and he came out successful and thus he could capture the throne after the death of Bindusara, right? So this is how Ashoka came to the throne after Bindusara. Fine? Now, to look into the history of Ashoka, we have his own edicts. Alright, Ashokan edicts. Now, edicts are inscriptions. Now, why do we call them as edicts? Because these inscriptions of Ashoka, they were actually in the form of, royal orders or instructions, because of which they are called as edicts. Fine. Now, Ashoka was the first Indian king who, spoke to the people through his inscriptions, right? And his inscriptions were made on rocks, on stone pillars, polished pillars, and even in caves. Alright, and they are in the form of royal orders, as we have said. His inscriptions are found in many parts or in, major parts of the subcontinent, right? And not just that, they are also found in Kandahar in Afghanistan. Alright, in India, in the Indian subcontinent, they are found in almost all the places, but however, they are not found in Kerala and they are not found in Tamil Nadu. So here in these places we do not find his edicts, but in other major almost a major part of the country we find them. All right, and his edicts were mainly composed in Prakrit language and written in Brahmi script. Right. However, in northwestern part of India we find his inscriptions in Kharoshti script. Right. In Afghanistan also his inscriptions are found, which are appeared in Aramaic, in Greek script, and even in Greek language. Alright. And we see that his inscriptions were mainly placed on the ancient highways. Right. And these inscriptions of Ashoka, it helps us in rebuilding his history. Right. It throws light on his career, his external policies, his domestic policies, and also the extent of his empire. Right. In most of his inscriptions, Ashoka is referred to as, just remember this, is referred to as Devanampiya or Piyadasi. Alright, so these are the titles given to Ashoka in his inscriptions. Right. Now, after Ashoka, he took the throne, one major war that he fought was the Kalinga War. Right. And we get the details of the Kalinga War from the 13th major edict of Ashoka. Just remember this, okay? The 13th major edict. It was a major incident in the reign of the long reign of Ashoka, right? And in this war, actually, around 1 lakh people were killed and around 1.5 lakh people were captured as prisoners of war, right? And this war also brought sufferings to the priests and the Buddhist monks. And, the edicts, they say that Ashoka, he was deeply, disturbed or affected by such extent of death and destruction. And after the Kalinga War, he totally abandoned the policy of physical conquest. Alright, he abandoned the physical conquest policy, which is termed to as Bheri Ghosha. Alright, Bheri Ghosha, that is the policy of physical conquest. Instead, he adopted a policy of cultural conquest, which is termed as Dhamma Ghosha. Alright, Dhamma Ghosha. Dhamma means in Sanskrit that is Dharma. Alright, Dharma in Sanskrit, which is referred to here as Dhamma Ghosha. Fine. Ashoka, he started considering victory by Dhamma to be the most or the foremost victory. Alright. And not just this, he also appointed officers who were called the Dharma Mahamatras, right? Who were appointed to spread the policy of Dhamma or Dharma among all his subjects. Alright. And even the tribal people were asked to follow the principles of Dharma. Right. So after the Kalinga War, Ashoka, he tried to conquer even the foreign dominions ideologically. Alright. He gave importance to the welfare of man and women even in foreign lands. Alright. He sent ambassadors of peace to Greek kingdoms. Right. But however, although we see that he is into the policy of Dhamma, but we do not find any mention of his, abandoning or disbanding his huge army. Right. And that is, he followed a kind of practical policy, right? Even the tribal people were at times threatened if they violated the rules of social order or Dhamma, right? Rajukas are officers who were appointed for administering justice in the land, right? And the Kandhar inscription, okay, out of several inscriptions, few of the inscriptions that you're talking about, just try to remember what they have in them, right? Kandhar inscription, it speaks that Ashoka's Dhamma policy was successful with the fishermen and hunters, right? Because many of them, they gave up killing and they took up agriculture to lead a settled life, right? So this is about Ashoka's Dhamma policy. Now, Ashoka, he actually converted to Buddhism as a result of the Kalinga War, right? And it said that records say that he became a monk and he undertook several pilgrimages to Buddhist shrines, and we also have the mention of Dharma Yatras in his inscriptions. Dharma Yatra, right? That is pilgrimages, right? Even a Buddhist council was held where missionaries, Ashoka sent missionaries to South India, to Sri Lanka, to Burma and other countries for spread of Buddhism, alright? One of his inscriptions, that is the Ruminde inscription, it even mentions that Lumbini is the birthplace of Buddha, right? So Lumbini, it was exempted, that village was exempted from Bali. You remember Bali? The initial voluntary offering, which later turned out to be a compulsory payment, right? So Lumbini was exempted from Bali, and Bhaga means the royal share of the produce or the tax which was collected from the land. So from Lumbini, Bhaga was reduced to 1/8. Whereas we have seen that in others, it is from around 1/4 to 1/6, right? It was reduced in Lumbini to 1/8, right? So Ruminde inscription, just remember this, alright? Now if we have to talk of Ashoka, he or his Dhamma, he set a very high ideal of paternal kingship for himself, right? He considered himself as, a paternal figure, right? Like he told his officers to tell his subjects that they were like his children, right? And he asked the officers to take good care of his subjects, right? And Ashoka, he also disapproved several rituals, and most of them were rituals which were followed by women, right? Ashoka forbade the killing of certain birds and animals, and he completely prohibited slaughter of animals, all right? He also prohibited social functions which were, noisy or in which people indulge in revelries, right? So the objective of Ashoka was actually to preserve the social order. This is important, okay? What was main objective was to preserve the social order or to maintain a, moral or an ethical code of conduct, right? Which meant to strengthen the institution of family and also the existing social classes, where Ashoka actually says that, we should pay respect to all classes of the society, right? Even to slaves or sudras, right? Thus, he taught people to live and also to let live, all right? So these were his policies, right? And he held that with good behavior, people could actually attain heaven, all right? Although he never mentioned about nirvana, although he was a Buddhist, but he never mentioned about nirvana. He just said that people could attain heaven with good behavior, right? And thus he preached a kind of, non-sectarian and a universal faith. Non-sectarian means it was not into any kind of, differences of different religions, right, that existed between different religions. So he was tolerant to different religions, all right, and he preached a universal faith. Now, if we have to talk of Ashoka's place in history, he is considered as the greatest missionary ruler in the history of the ancient world. All right. He brought about a kind of political unification of the country, right? And it was a vast empire. Ashoka's empire was vast, okay, which spread to almost all the parts of India except a few parts in the southern India, and he brought it under one umbrella by one dharma, right? By following one dharma, one language, and practically one script, that is the Brahmi script, because most of his inscriptions were in Brahmi, although he respected the other scripts like Kharoshthi script or Greek or Aramaic, right? We find some of his inscriptions even in those scripts, right? And he followed a tolerant religious policy, as we have discussed, right? Ashoka had a zeal for missionary activities, right? And this actually helped him in administration and also promoted, cultural contacts with distant provinces and also with several backward provinces, right? And thus the material culture of the empire, it spread to not just in his empire, it also spread to Kalinga, it spread to the Deccan, and it also spread to northern Bengal, right? So there was a kind of spread, a great spread of the material culture of his empire. Right, we will discuss the spread in the next chapter in detail. All right. His policy was of peace, non-aggression, and cultural conquest. All right. And another leader that we have mentioned is Akhenaten, who was an Egyptian king of around the 14th century. All right, of around 14th century BC. So he was also a kind of king who followed a pacific policy. All right, a policy of peace. But however, it's evident that Ashoka did not know about that Egyptian king. All right. Now, as we talk of Ashoka's policy of Dhamma, he actually counseled even his successors to follow the policy of Dhamma. However, we see that Ashoka's policy actually did not make any lasting impression on his successors, neither on his viceroys or his vassals, and not even on his neighbors. Right, because after Ashoka's retirement, the viceroys they proclaimed independence, right, and even his neighbors, they attacked or they captured some parts of his empire. Not very late. All right, so we can say that Ashoka's policy, it was not a long-lasting impression, right, and we will talk about the fall or the causes of fall of the Mauryan Empire in our next lecture, right, in detail. Right, because the next lecture will be about the significance of the Maurya rule, where we will be talking about the social conditions, we will be talking about the economic regulations, the spread of the material culture, and in detail the fall or the causes of fall of such a huge or the Mauryan Empire. Right. So with this, I conclude this lecture. Hope it was useful for you. Right. Do like it, subscribe to the channel. Till we meet next, take good care of yourselves. Thank you. Keep learning.